On this day in history, July 30th, 762, Baghdad is founded. Included in the following is an excerpt from the 1944 edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, going over the history of the city. Baghdad, the foremost city of Mesopotamia and the capital of modern Iraq, is situated in latitude 33 degrees 20 minutes north and longitude 44 degrees 24 minutes east, on the Tigris at the point where the river and the Euphrates approach their closest approximation, to 25 miles. The city was originally built on the west bank of the river, but for over 1,000 years the greater part of the town has been on the east bank. Today there is, however, a large and growing suburb, including a railway station on the west side, the two banks being connected by a bridge of boats. Baghdad is described by a traveler who visited it in 1583 as being a town not very great, but very populous, and of great traffic of strangers, for that is the way to Persia, Turkey, and Arabia, and from thence do go caravans for these and other places. Though the town has grown since that description was written, in other aspects the words are still true, and caravans today, by motor car and aeroplane, still run to Persia, Iran, and Turkey. Baghdad lies at a central point in the Middle East, and there has been from Sumerian times an important town either on this very spot or close at hand. In early Sumerian times, the ancient capital lay at Kish on the Euphrates, and when that river changed its course, Babylon succeeded to Kish. In later times, Ctesiphon, and subsequently Seleucia, on the west bank of the Tigris opposite Ctesiphon, succeeded to the supremacy. Baghdad itself, although on a site which has been occupied since very early times and still preserves the name which it has held for at least 4,000 years, did not rise to the position of a city of the first rank until the foundation of the Arab town on the west bank in the latter half of the 8th century AD. Since that time, the Adobe of Peace, although it has enjoyed very varying fortunes, has always been the most important city of Mesopotamia. Various factors have contributed to these changes: geographical, political, and, as always, in Mesopotamia, religious. Baghdad forms the meeting point of the land routes of Southwest Asia, until the discovery by the seafaring nations of Western Europe of a sea route to the Far East. Baghdad was the nodal point in the caravan routes between East and West. It commanded the two waterways of the Tigris and Euphrates, and was close to the limit of navigation upwards of the former stream. It was the natural center for the roads through the upland country to the north, for the ways through the Gap of Khorasan, and for the practicable routes across the desert both to the Mediterranean and to the holy cities of Islam. Its commercial position was therefore unrivaled. The more stable condition of the Tigris, which is less given to moving its course than the Euphrates, makes the site, in spite of the constant danger from floods, more favorable to the continued existence of a city than the alternative Kish or Babylon. So long as Mesopotamia remained a fertile land of gardens, whose fruitfulness could excite the wonder of all who visited her, Baghdad was truly the abode of peace and plenty. At the height of her fame, during the early years of the 9th century, Baghdad was the home of wealthy merchants and learned scholars who flourished under the shadow of an enlightened caliphate. Under Mamun, the successor of Harun al-Rashid, it rose to the center of Islam, at a time when Islam represented the highest civilization of the West. Renowned for learning, famous for silks, and for gorgeous tiled buildings, Baghdad became the city of the Arabian Nights, and seemed certain, so favored was its geographical situation, to enjoy a long period of prosperity. But the political circumstances were destined to prevent the realization of this dream. For nearly 2 generations in the middle of the 9th century, the city was deserted in favor of Samarra, and, when the central power did return to Baghdad, the commanders of the faithful had degenerated to the position of mere shadow kings in the hands of the Turkish bodyguard, which predecessors had founded. Mesopotamia, however, still remained the fruitful country which it had been in antiquity, and Baghdad, though shorn of her former splendors, was still an important center which merchants and pilgrims resorted. The real downfall of Baghdad did not come till 1258, when Hulagu the Mongol and his hordes overran Mesopotamia. They destroyed the Arab civilization, and by systematically breaking down the irrigation system, converted what had formerly been an agricultural land into a waste of steppe suited only for pastoral nomadism. A period of political instability ensued. Both these factors contributed to the downfall of Baghdad. She depended for her position on a continuation of a prosperous trade, which in an unsettled and devastated country was impossible. Further, a new situation had arisen. From the coming of the Mongols until the 20th century, apart from short intervals, Baghdad was never an independent capital. She was dependent first on the Mongol Emperor of Persia, and then she became the southern capital of a smaller Mongol state. At the beginning of the 15th century, she fell under Turkoman domination, and a century later became part of the Persian kingdom. A prey to the warring factions of the Turks and Persians, the city was more than once put to the sword, but relapsed into comparative obscurity after its final capture by the Sultan Murad IV, an independent Pashalik, attacked by Nadir Shah, and then once more at the beginning of the 19th century restored to full Turkish control. Baghdad remained a remote town, far from the centers of political importance, but often the unfortunate victim of political ambition. But the ancient fame and commercial possibilities of the country led at the end of the 19th century to the idea of a Baghdad railway to connect Central Europe with the Middle East. Finally, in the readjustment of frontiers which followed the war of 1914-18, Baghdad was made once more the capital of an independent Arab state. It is significant that this restoration of the city to her old position should be associated with a supreme effort to undo the work of the Mongols and to convert the steppe once more into agricultural land. This changing political position has coincided with far-reaching developments in methods of transport, which have restored to Baghdad much of its former importance on the trade routes. Before 1914, Baghdad lay outside these, and the railway was built only as far north as Shurghat, and therefore served no useful purpose. Apart from the uncertainty of river routes, Baghdad remained isolated. Since this time, a line has been built down the Euphrates to Basra. The Tigris line was merely a wartime measure. Of greater importance, however, has been the establishment of a greater aerodrome at Hinadi, a suburb of Baghdad, and the development of aircraft services to Cairo and Basra. Further than this, the old desert roads are now usable at regular intervals by motor cars, so that the journey from London to Baghdad can now be made in a week. Baghdad has direct air connections with London and with India and the Far East. The completion of the railroad to Turkey resulted in a direct rail connection with the Mediterranean. Owing, no doubt, to the improvement in communications, Baghdad in the 20th century began once more to regain her rightful place as the great market of the Middle East. The principal exports are carpets, wool, gum, hides, and dates. A considerable import trade is carried on, especially in cotton and tea, most of which is re-exported. The Persian trade, once more, became of value, and Mosul looked to Baghdad as the natural channel through which to sell her grain. The traveler who wishes to see a purely Eastern city will not find it in Baghdad, except in the byways and in the few old mosques which remain. Hilla has preserved better its purity Oriental character and recalls many of the features which characterized Baghdad before it was westernized. During the 20th century, changes have taken place in the city itself, which have altered it out of all recognition. Some of the main roads have been straightened and a macadam surface laid down, so that a great part of the city is available for motor traffic. There are a telephone and taxicab service. A modern water system replaces the old canals and insanitary methods of drawing water from the Tigris and its subsidiary channels, and there has consequently been considerable improvement of public health, though in spite of registration, statistics are not yet reliable. Population from 1935, 287,000. Estimated from 1938, 400,000. Inside the town itself, although the old converted bazaars still survive, there are numerous stores on western lines, a hospital, and modern hotels. Near the racecourse, what is practically a garden suburb is rapidly developing, and there is another large settlement growing up round the aerodrome at Hinadi. Not the least interesting feature of the new regime is the establishment of a museum of Mesopotamian antiquities, largely through the energy and enthusiasm of Miss Gertrude Bell. It receives a share of all the antiquities excavated in Iraq.